Okay, now let's look at the guiding principles. Some top-level considerations. Firstly, people might believe that the guiding principles have been introduced with ITIL 4. In fact, they were introduced into ITIL version 3 in 2016 as part of the publication The ITIL Practitioner. So the guiding principles existed in ITIL version 3 within the practitioner publication and the course and exam. Never reflected in ITIL version 3 Foundation, but they, if you like, started in version 3. They've been sort of embraced and embellished and built upon within ITIL 4. Part of that sort of embellished and embraced and built upon includes also influences from some other IT best practices and frameworks and guidance that's out there. So Agile, DevOps, Lean, COBIT, some of the sort of principles around those sort of best practices have also sort of been applied and embellished within the ITIL 4 guiding principles. So if you're familiar with some of those other best practices and guidance, you may see elements of it in some of the guiding principles we'll look at shortly. Why do we have the guiding principles? Where they're there to give us a direction, a sort of an approach we should sort of consider whenever we're looking to do something different, whenever we're looking to create something new, change something that exists, or maybe even remove and decommission something that's no longer required. The guiding principles should be, should stand the test of time. They should be universal and enduring. By that, in organisations, things chop and change. Above us, below us, organisations go through changes, strategies change, but the guiding principles should remain consistent throughout that. Okay, so we wouldn't see the guiding principles changing. Yeah, they should be universal and enduring throughout all that. Okay. And in terms of the classic sort of exam question, well, which guiding principles should we use? Do we pick one? Do we use all 7? Well, select the ones that are most appropriate for what you're trying to achieve. So let's look at very high level the guiding principles. As we said, there are 7. So let's start initially with this focus on value. So if you've done ITIL 4 Foundation, then the one thing that comes out really, really strong, if you like, the overarching, the raison d'etre for ITIL 4 is to ensure we create, deliver value through our products and services. So it would be strange not to have a guiding principle that recommends that we should always focus on value when we're looking to do something, whether it's create something, change something, or possibly even when we look to remove things. Yeah. If you think it in the context of improvements, then why would you make an improvement, if it's not going to create some form of value? Okay, so this focus on value is pretty important in the context of the overall ITIL 4, if you like, sort of regime. Now, to focus on value itself, you do need to understand some sort of key characteristics of this thing called value. Okay, so value is an interesting thing. Firstly, the people who determine value are not the provider, it's the recipient, or in our case, it will be the consumer. So as a service provider, we can tell our consumers that they're getting great value from us as a service provider. We can tell them that. Do they actually believe it? They will make the choice. They will make that decision. Okay, so key characteristic. Value is determined by the recipient. And secondly, value can change over time and circumstance. So what people valued, say, a year ago, may not necessarily be something that they value today. Okay, so value can change over time and circumstance. And that's really important because 2 key sort of steps of focus on value is if you're going to create value, you need to understand, well, who is the consumer? Yeah, who consumes a particular service? Yeah, and understanding what that consumer values is going to be really important because you can't focus on value if you're delivering stuff that the consumer doesn't recognise, that consumer doesn't see as providing value to them. Okay, and of course, even if we think we understand the consumer and we think we understand what they value, of course, value can change over time and circumstance. So whilst it's important to understand who is the consumer, who is the recipient, if we make an improvement, who should get the value, we need to ask the question, what would they value? Because what we thought they would value maybe a year ago may be different today. Okay, so those two characteristics, yeah, who is the recipient and value changes over time and circumstance, those are important sort of aspects to bring into this focus on value. Start where you are. So there are two sort of lenses on start where you are. The first one is look at what we've already got. Look at what sort of technology, what components, what capabilities we have, and ask the simple question, can we actually use these? Can we reuse these? Okay, we don't necessarily need to go out and create new components if we have stuff that will already fit the bill. So if it's something that is fit for purpose, it's fit for use, that's fine. If it isn't, well, that's okay too, but at least we've considered it. Okay, so an important thing, let's look at what we've got. Yeah, can we use it? If so, great. But if we can't, well, that's okay. At least we've considered it. The other aspect of start where you are is this importance of measurement. If we're going to do something different, how do we know if we've made a difference? If we're going to embark on an improvement, how do we know we've actually delivered the improvement? We need to get those baseline measures, those assessments to understand the current state. A simple analogy would be if you want to lose weight, then ideally you should stand on the scales first. Yeah? Yes, you can lose weight, but if you don't stand on the scales, you'll have no idea of how much weight you've actually lost. Okay, so start where you are. Those two sort of lenses. Look at what we've already got. Can we reuse it? If so, that's great. If not, at least we've considered it. And secondly, before we make any improvement or do anything different, yeah, we need to get those baseline measures. We need to understand the current state. Progress iteratively with feedback. This takes quite a steer from, I guess, the agile way of working, which is how can we sort of break things down into small sort of incremental steps or iterations. Okay, so if we want to embark on a big improvement initiative, maybe actually it's easier to break it down into a number of small steps. Yeah, deliver something and then actually check to see from feedback whether we've actually achieved what we meant to deliver. So an example of this could be, say for example, in a service desk, we might want to improve our first line fix rate. Okay, so for a service desk, the number of calls you can actually resolve with the user on the phone is a really good driver of customer satisfaction. Okay, and we might want to improve our first line fix sort of rate. Yeah, so using the old start where you are, what's our current rate? It might be, let's say for argument's sake, 10%. And we decide we want to improve it and we want to get to, I don't know, 30%. Okay, so we could try and do that in one big improvement initiative. However, it might be sensible to break it down into some small iterations. Maybe we initially look at, well, what sort of calls can we actually reasonably target for first line resolution by the service desk. So we might break them down by network, by database, by application, by server, yeah, whatever categorization we want to use. So we break it down into those small steps. And maybe we focus on maybe initially that first iteration, which might be network. So which of the calls we take for network issues that we pass to our network second line support team, how many of those do we believe we could reasonably do at the service desk at first line with a little bit of help, support, some documentation, some knowledge scripts, some knowledge transfer, etc., etc. So working with the network team. And then we set about the improvements to achieve a better first line fix for network calls. And at the end of a period where we've implemented everything, we might want to look at our performance in dealing with first line fix for network calls. And yes, we've improved. They've got better. We've set a target maybe for that particular iteration and we've achieved it. The important thing, of course, is to get feedback. Okay, so we've met our target. But let's talk to the network team. Let's talk to them about, are you still getting calls coming through that you believe the service desk should resolve? And well, yes, we do. We still get the odd call coming through, which we thought you were going to do in the service desk. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Secondly, oh, and by the way, sometimes we get incidents that come through to us where the first line sort of documented approach has not been followed. and we've actually compounded the issue. So we're now getting incidents coming through where you've not followed the agreed procedures and you've made it worse. Okay, so on one hand, we've made progress, which is good. We've met maybe a target, which is good, but the feedback suggests we've got some issues, either in terms of training or education across the service desk. So before we embark on the next iteration, which might be for database, it's important we fix those issues, yeah, rather than get to the end of all those improvement iterations and suddenly find we've got actually a load of issues which we now need to retrospectively try and address. So that's a good example of this progress iteratively with feedback. Collaborate and promote visibility. So 2 lenses on this guiding principle. The one thing that ITIL 4 is really strong is this move away from sort of silo working, okay, to actually work more collaboratively, yeah, either across our own organisation or with our suppliers, with our vendors, working together, okay. The idea of working together in that collaborative approach is, of course, is when we've got a proposed idea or solution or a change to the way we work, let's include the appropriate stakeholders who may be impacted by that change or may just have insight and experience to add to the discussion. The chances are that if we involve the right people, we'll end up with probably a better solution, yeah, and better buy-in than if we did it in complete isolation. Okay, so this collaboration approach, really important. And of course, if we're going to work together, then of course we need this sort of visibility of the work. Okay, so this is very much around the flow of work that we're all interested in participating in. Where's that flow of work? Where's it at? Yeah, have we got bottlenecks? What's the next piece of work coming to my team? Are we ready to actually catch that and actually do the work required? So this concept of visibility, the flow of work, looking at where we may have bottlenecks, where we might need to reprioritise. Are we seeing sort of delays? Are we seeing rework? Are we seeing waste because we're making errors and having to sort of go back and rework things? So that visibility is also important if we're going to encourage people to work collaboratively. Think and work holistically. Yeah, IT is quite a complex world now. So whenever we're going to change something, we need to consider what is the impact. You know, if we're going to change, one small cog of a machine, what's the impact of changing that, either upstream or downstream? Okay, so this sort of think and work holistically is quite important. So we think the bigger picture, we think of the implications of what we're changing. And of course, you can probably see to actually get that good understanding, we might need to do a bit of collaboration. Okay, so you can see actually some of these guiding principles sometimes draw on each other to help. But think and work holistically is that big picture. Okay, later in the course, we're going to look at the 4 dimensions, and the 4 dimensions are to make us think holistically about what we're going to do. So think and work holistically as a guiding principle. You can see that actually the 4 dimensions are really good sort of plug-in to look and think about the bigger picture. Sometimes we might need, say, people to help us build that bigger picture. So emphasis on collaboration. Sometimes we might need to use the technologies that we have, some of those end-to-end sort of technologies that give us that end-to-end view of performance, the end-to-end view of capacity, the end-to-end view of availability, and the end-to-end view of the life cycle of things like incidents and requests. So technology can also help us build that bigger picture, okay? But think and work holistically. Try not to miss things out, maybe unconsciously forget to do certain things, which might then cause us an issue. So keep it simple and practical. This takes a steer from lean. And basically this is, saying if you can create something in 5 steps, why would you document 10 steps? Yeah. If you keep things simple and practical, it makes it easier to maintain, and it also makes it easier for people to understand. Obviously, life's not always about creating new stuff, but there may be things we already have that are overly complex. So again, we can use this guiding principle to ask the question, are we actually performing steps that actually add no value? Can we take some of these steps out? Yeah. Can we do it in a different way? Okay, so keep it simple and practical. Try and keep things simple where we can, makes them easier to understand, makes them easier to maintain. Often keep it simple and practical starts with this outcome-based thinking. What are you trying to achieve which is the most simple and practical way to actually achieve that. Optimize and automate. So this is putting a focus on where can we effectively use automation. So automation is quite an expensive resource, so we should focus it on the things that are really important. Yeah? And if we do that, we may be able to actually remove people from doing routine work and free them up to be involved in more rewarding work and higher priority work. Again, with things which we automate, then we can actually create sort of machine speed responses to circumstances that we've documented as part of our automation rules. So we don't incur delays, we don't incur sort of delayed decision making. Automation will do what you want it to do every time consistently. Okay, so we get speed, but we also eliminate potentially the chance for sort of human error. Okay. And of course, if we're going to automate things, then ideally we should automate things that are relatively simple, yeah, and practical. So again, you can see this sort of draw on other guiding principles. So again, you wouldn't want to automate something that's overly complex because you'll create overly complex automation. So ideally, before we automate, we should optimize as best as possible. That's a better route to success and more likely to deliver consistent automation routines than if we try and automate sort of overly complex routines and sort of working practices. And of course, benefits of automation from a consumer user perspective, of course, that we do things faster. So if we could automate, for example, service requests, we could fulfill them a lot quicker than if, of course, we fulfill them with manual sort of activities. So those are the guiding principles. Those are the 7. As I say, as we've gone through those, you can see that actually by design, they do draw upon each other. Okay, so we've seen a couple of examples, where we talked about sort of optimize and automate. There's an element of keep it simple and practical. When we've talked about sort of think and working holistically, trying to understand that big picture, to help us achieve that big picture, we might need stakeholders who can give input and perspective. Okay, so collaborate and visibility. So there is this sort of interaction. So they all stand their own corner in terms of the high level. Well, they do interact with each other. As we said before, in terms of which guiding principle should we use, do we use just one or do we use all 7? Select the ones that are most appropriate for what you're trying to achieve. The only exception to that would be focus on value. If you're doing an improvement initiative, then the improvement should create some value. So focus on value should be a guiding principle we always use with any improvement initiative. Okay, but in general terms, select the guiding principles that are most appropriate for what you're trying to achieve.